Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA for the week ending October 28th, 2016. The FCPA Blog New York Conference event episode. That's a mouthful. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and cohort in crime, Jay Rosen, Mr. Translations himself. I'm Tom Fox, the Compliance Ambassador for the Red Flag Group, and this week we report on the FCPA Blog New York Conference. It was a great event put on by Dick Cassin and Harry Cassin, the founder and CEO of the FCPA Blog, respectively. In this episode, Jay and I talk about the panels and speakers at the event, the social component of having some of the top FCPA compliance commentators speak, and what the FCPA blog has brought to the greater compliance community. The episode comes in at around 24 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and welcome to a special on-location This Week in FCPA for the week ending October 28th, 2016. As with me always and on location, Mr. Translations himself, Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome to you. And it's fun to do this in person. We don't get to do it very often.
Jay, why don't you tell our audience where we are on location today?
We are on location at the Lexington Hotel in New York City off of Lexington Avenue. And we had the pleasure of gathering with our ethics and compliance and FCPA colleagues for the inaugural FCPA Blog Conference here in New York City.
So Jay, I thought maybe we could visit a little bit about that today. We have had not too much action this week in the FCPA world, but certainly a lot of action here in New York today. So why don't you start off with maybe some of your general observations about the conference? Maybe tell our listeners a little bit about the FCPA blog, who founded it, and what today's conference was about from your perspective.
Sure. So I believe they're coming up just about on their 10-year anniversary, and Dick Cassin is the founder of the FCPA blog, and he was really, I think, one of the first people out in the FCPA world to provide a forum for different practitioners to exchange ideas and to really track what is happening in the FCPA community. The conference today was a very unique format that Richard gathered all of the editors and contributors to the magazine. So it was really a wonderful opportunity to get to meet the people who, on a daily and weekly basis inform the community on different happenings within the FCPA world. So we had a whole range of people from academics to outside counsel to people in the forensics field and other people of the commentariat like Tom and myself.
So it was really, you're right, it was a very unique gathering. First of all, kudos to Dick Cassin. He gave the opening talk or opening presentation today. And it was very interesting to learn that the FCPA blog is just about to hit its 10-year anniversary. He gave some pretty stunning numbers of number of people who've contributed to well over, I think, 500 contributed pieces to the FCPA blog. But Jay, what kind of struck me the most was, and it dovetails with my own personal experience about Dick Cassin, but he viewed the FCPA blog as a bulletin board. And what he wanted to create and what he has created is a place for the compliance community to generally talk about enforcement and compliance in a way that brings our own unique voices to the conversation. So it was a really interesting presentation from Dick. I really appreciated kind of what he's done. He certainly put me on the road to the places that I've gone on the FCPA commentary world. He gave me a place to post my first blog post, and then he encouraged me to start my own blog, and he encouraged me to write my first book. So he's really been an inspiration to me, and I'm not the only one. He's inspired, and it was really a great way to honor him as well today.
Yeah. Now, when this all came together, Tom, how involved was the editorial board, and how did this all take shape?
Well, Dick and his son Harry, who is actually the CEO of his organization, put it together, and they pitched it to the editorial board to be speakers and presenters. And of course, most of us jumped on it immediately. The opportunity to be associated and work with Dick on anything is something we all greatly value. So from there, he kind of selected who he wanted to pair up or put on panels, and then we selected really or suggested our own topics, and then put our individual presentations together. So for instance, as I think our listeners would know, Mike Schur and I talked about the CCO and who does the CCO really report to. Is it the shareholders? Is it the senior executives? Is it the stockholders? Is it the public? Is it the government? And we were able to really explore the role of the CCO in the current compliance climate. So it was a great opportunity for us to get together. And I would say that one of the highlights for me was last night we had a dinner of the speakers and the editorial board, and it was really a great chance for me to sit down with many of the top commentators in the FCPA space and just have a wide-ranging discussion about all of our passions and our topics, and throw questions at each other in a very collegial manner, in a manner that facilitated a wide range of discussions, all of course hosted by Dick and Harry Cassin. So thanks to them for doing that for us last night. But it was really a highlight for me to be around some of the top blog and commentary commentators and highlighters of blog posts that are around. So really good. And then the conference today was pretty interesting. That I think you and I both attend conferences that are a lot of nuts and bolts and how to, and great instructions from some pretty great commentators, or thought leaders rather. But here we had a lot of commentators commenting about what either we think where things have been or where they may be going in the future. So that was a little bit different focus than many of the conferences that we attend.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of amplify Tom's point, it was very PowerPoint light. There was really only one set of mini PowerPoint deck, and that was on the last presentation of the day. So, I think when people get a chance to interact with presenters, and that was really basically encouraged. I think the majority of the speakers who got up there said, look, anytime you have a question, please stop us and let's really go into that. So that, as we say, is kind of different out there. And I think the other thing that's unique about this is that some of the conferences that we go to, they try to be everything to everybody. And this was all about FCPA. So there are certain branches that will follow off this tree. So we'll talk about ethics or compliance, or, take a look at this from many different perspectives. But I think the overarching umbrella here is FCPA, and that makes it unique too.
That's a great point, actually, a series of great points, Jay. A lot of interaction. Everyone took questions, and a pretty interactive audience in terms of their questions. Probably for me, one of the more interesting sessions was not a panel, but actually a talk by Lanny Brewer, former number 2 at the Department of Justice. And he really focused on the pilot program. And I was somewhat surprised that he really talked about the pilot program as an open experiment, an open question as to whether or not it's been successful or not, or even will be successful. So he talked about the cases that have occurred this summer, and he correctly pointed out that they all came about before the implementation of the pilot program. So in his mind, there has not yet been a real pilot program case to test the structure of potential discounts under the pilot program. But the other thing he raised was the goal of the Department of Justice is to try to resolve cases in 12 months. So that's really not something we had heard before. And if that is true, that will be a significant shortening of time. I'm not sure how you're going to be able to do that when you have international investigations where you have to get documents from overseas through other government agencies. But what it really drove home to me, Jay, was the pressure it's going to put on companies to not only do their investigations more quickly and efficiently, but actually to have everything ready when the government comes. So that means that you have to have your compliance program in shape, up to snuff, and more importantly, documented everything so that you can turn over the documentation to demonstrate that you had a best practices compliance program in place, even in the face of an incident or potential incident that you've self-disclosed reporting. So I think it's going to put more pressure on certainly people like yourself and the services you deliver as Mr. Translations, and for people like myself that might be doing nuts and bolts compliance policy work. It's going to put as much pressure on those service providers as well. So in the don't ask for something, you may get it category. If companies are going to expect a 12-month turnaround from the government, companies are going to have to be ready to have the information to deliver it, but also deliver it on a much more quick and efficient basis.
Yeah, so that kind of brings up a couple, this theme about what happened with the pilot program and what you need to deliver and when. There was a subsequent panel that was with Ren McEachern from the FBI and Matt Queller, who recently left the DOJ and is now at Deloitte. And one of the things that they talked about was that there are certain instructions that the DOJ or the FBI can be giving to a company, like, let us interview this individual. And if the company does not follow that spirit of it and it does the interview themselves, it's a possibility to either taint the investigation or not really have it going the way that the DOJ wants. So I think it's an interesting point that on one hand, you as the company are encouraged to self-investigate, to self-remediate, but the question that we always come back to is when is the right time to go in?
Right.
So, that kind of extends that out. And, the other point, and I know you've got something to say about here, but I want to get this out before I forget. When Andy Spalding was speaking at the end, he talked about that, this year was the year of the declination.
Right.
But now the last two things that we've seen is the declination and the disgorgement. So Andy was postulating, is the declination gone? Because the declination is supposed to mean that the government declines to charge you. But if they're declining to charge you, how can they charge you disgorgement for the ill-gotten gains? So there seems to be a little bit of a paradox there as well.
So Lanny Brewer addressed that point by asking a question, and his question is, does a declination with disgorgement equal an NPA with a fine and penalty, or disgorgement? And he sort of self-answered that question, or perhaps even responding to a comment by Mark Bone, one of the an FCPA on the editorial board, but also in attendance today. And Mark pointed out, I think, the criminal procedure differences in an NPA and a declination, and that when a company receives a declination, it affords more protection for collateral litigation like a shareholder derivative action or other lawsuits that may give corporations greater cover, even though they may be paying profit disgorgement. So they're in kind of a long-winded way, Lanny Brewer answered his own question, I think, by responding to the comment. Nevertheless, it's a valid point raised by Andy Spalding, and we'll just have to see where that shakes out going forward. But a corporation receiving a declination is the best thing it can receive from the legal perspective for all other collateral litigation.
How about back to that other point about whether or not you're playing by the DOJ's playbook in terms of running your own internal parallel investigation? What are your thoughts there, Tom?
Sure. So Lanny Brewer also brought that up in the context of you may have different concerns or different foci, if I can use that legal word and go all lawyer on you here, from what the Department of Justice wants. You may want to do a root cause analysis. You may want to get information that allows you to remediate more quickly. You may want to try to graft enough information that you can make decisions on disciplining and or terminating employees. You may want to actually do an investigation which would allow you to defend other civil litigation. So a corporation could have other concerns different than the Department of Justice, which I don't think would surprise anyone. And those differences may lead to a different form of your investigation. So what Lanny Brewer suggested, and he recognized that could be a dynamic tension, but what he suggested is that the Corporation Counsel have discussions with the Department of Justice. Because if the Department of Justice is going to take the position that you either do what we say or that's not cooperation, that's certainly one thing. And that may not be a positive development from the defense bar eyes. So he also raises in terms of the considerations you need to discuss with a executive management team or a board of directors in the context of your decision to self-disclose or not, because you have to fully kind of flesh that out so that they understand that the Department of Justice may try to direct you to do an investigation in a manner that you might not have. So Lanny Brewer believes, I think, the key is communication with the Department of Justice. Certainly to cooperate as fully as possible, but if your interests diverge in terms of the scope of your investigation, you want to make sure that the department understands that so they don't denigrate your cooperation credit.
So just so you don't think it was too much all about FCPA and declinations, the morning started off with a very interesting panel where we had the Chief Compliance Officers from Airbus and Brown-Forman.
Yes.
And, I thought they had some very good points to make about how they go about instilling values in their workforce. And one of the things that, what's Jerry's last name?
Crawl.
Okay, he used a very visceral metaphor to me, and he said basically, what is it, when your heart aches? Is that what he said?
When the knot is in your stomach.
When the knot is in your stomach, that's the time to speak up. So I think, there's lots of things. You don't want to do this if it ends up on the front page of the New York Times, and you don't want to do this if it's ethically wrong. But I think even the most sociopathic of us has that knot in their stomach when they know a decision is going to go the wrong way. So that really resonated for me. And I think if you're able to take things like that and share them with your workforce, it becomes a lot more than a rule-based thing. And it should, be a touch point and something they can hopefully remember to do the right thing.
Jay, that's excellent. And he also talked about, he was asked the question from the audience, how do you translate not so much the passion you have as a chief compliance officer here in the United States, but the ethical values and the speak-up culture. And he said that people may not understand raising your hand, they may not understand speaking up, but the one concept that he's seen resonate across the globe is, what happens if you take a shortcut? So he used that discussion and that analogy that he thought everyone understood. You get in trouble when you take shortcuts. And so he pitches exceptions as shortcuts, and he said people get that. And when you couple that with if there's a knot in your stomach, that's the time to raise your hand and ask for help, whatever that help may be. He tries to provide that mechanism. And the other thing that I found very interesting about his company's structure is that they are very small employee base and depend on more than the average company on third parties, both in distribution and sales. So they have a very high risk because of the number of third parties they utilize. So he has lots and lots of training, conversation, and ongoing communication with third parties. And I think that would be a model that many of us could look to simply because they use third parties more than the typical company.
Yeah, so that was where we started off earlier in the morning. And I'm just trying to make sure that the one thing that I wanted to go back to in the your session with Mike Scher that was moderated by Julie DeMauro was on the podcast a couple weeks ago, Mike teased that there was going to be one more audience that the Chief Compliance Officer works for.
Yes.
And if I understood him correctly, he said the CCO works for themselves.
Right. He talked about it really in terms of your own conscience. And not conscious.
Consciousness?
Conscious. Your own conscience. That's it. Conscience. And, you know, when you know something's wrong and you're going to have to make a very difficult decision, and that's going to be an employment decision, that may be a career decision, but you can't violate your own ethical values as a CCO. And if you've gone to the mat on something that you're convinced is a legal violation, and the decision is made to move forward on a business basis, you can't violate your own ethical standards, and you just may have to leave the company for doing that. And so I thought it was a very interesting and indeed personal perspective from Mike Scherer on that point.
Definitely. The other thing that I thought was really great, there after lunch there was an introduction of scholarship winners.
Yes.
And some of these people had incredible backgrounds, either having worked for the military or worked for NGOs. They speak a lot of languages. One young man was an active member of the Air Force and wants to make compliance, his career moving forward. So I think this scholarship aspect is a really interesting part too, and it's helping to build future leaders for tomorrow.
And in fact, after the conference, I was speaking with Dick Cassin, and he told me that was the most moving part of the entire event for him, was the awards, the announcements of the scholarship award winners. And it was exactly what you said, that we I guess you can include us, but certainly he and the FCPA blog are helping bring a new generation of leadership to the compliance profession. And certainly with the scholarships that they awarded today, they are helping make that dream come true for many, many individuals on a very personal basis.
So I know you had a chance to speak with Dick a little bit. Did you get any preview as to whether there will be a second year, and any thoughts on which way to go with this in its next iteration?
Well, first of all, he's going to have a Singapore conference, and that will be in February of 2017. So if you happen to be listening to this and you're in Singapore, get ready, because Dick Cassin is bringing the FCPA Blog Roadshow to a venue near you soon. But I think Dick was very pleased at the turnout today. He was very pleased at the level of sponsorship. We had some great sponsors here today. He was very pleased that the editorial board participated with such enthusiasm. And he was very pleased, as I indicated, around the scholarship winners. So I think Dick may well make this an annual event. And if he does, I hope that anyone listening to this will maybe be able to attend next year, because I think it's going to become one of the top events. It's not going to be a 500 or 1,000 person event ever, I think. But that intimacy will allow, or the size, I think, will allow an intimacy that you do not get in many national events. And I think this one will truly be a national event.
Perfect. Where are we time-wise?
We are just rocking and rolling along. Anything else?
Well, this week you started to delve into
Embraer. And for those who don't know, Embraer settled a very, very large, long, lengthy FCPA investigation, announced this week with a $207 million fine, I think. So I've been exploring the underlying facts, the resolution, and frankly the stunning result that Embraer got, which was a 20% discount or a 25% discount off the lowest end of the sentencing range. So please check out my blog this week for that. But very interesting case, lots of lessons learned for the
and all over the world, right?
Well, they only limited to Dominican Republic, South Africa, Mozambique, and Saudi Arabia.
Okay, that's pretty good. I mean, they get around in that company.
They did. And pretty stunning law department, senior legal department involvement in the bribery scheme. So not very good for the lawyers out there. But that was really the highlight from I think the FCPA world, Jay. So how do you feel being on location? I mean, you're a Hollywood kind of guy.
This is actually kind of fun, you know. And the only thing I'm missing are Eminem and Lock to the Wonder Dog. But you know, when we get a chance there to be here and riff off each other, I think we do okay on the computer. But this adds another dimension.
That it does. So once again, everyone, we are live at the Lexington Hotel. We probably won't be back to this venue for at least a few weeks. Nevertheless, this is the This Week in FCPA, the New York, or the FCPA Blog New York City edition. So, Jay, thanks a lot, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks everybody for joining us to learn about the week that was in FCPA.